Welcome to another video, guys. Today we want to talk about creative RAW conversion in Adobe Camera RAW, but actually you can apply each step that I talk about here in Lightroom too. I won't cover much of the basics of JPEG versus RAW, but instead show you some tricks that few people know, where you can drastically change the color of a picture, drastically enhance the light and even shape the light, and all of this on the RAW file. So make sure to watch till the end of this video. Here we are in Adobe Camera RAW, opening the first file. An image taken at the Faroe Islands during one of those epic moments of light that last few minutes. Normally they come in very rainy weather, so just a minute before I took this picture it was raining, and then I saw the sun banging through the clouds. I stopped the car, jumped out and simply shot this image without any elaborate foreground, just focusing on the light and the view, and I was quite amazed. So let's work with this file. This is like a canvas where we can try to squeeze the most information that we can out of this file without any deterioration of image quality, because this is on the RAW file. So when I first started out, I just did very basic steps and very basic stuff in the RAW editing, and then I thought it would be best to do all the heavy incursion in Photoshop. But actually Camera RAW and Lightroom 2 give you a lot of options nowadays to do heavy intercourse with your image. So let's start it. In one of the last updates, Adobe gave us these profiles that you see up here. And the default will always be the Adobe Color profile, which looks fine for many images, but for even more images, especially landscape shots, the landscape profile will look better, and I think in this case it does. Now we toggle the shadow clipping warning and the highlight clipping warning that basically warn us about areas of the image that are blown out in the highlights or that have no information left in the shadows. So up here it's actually pure white, there's no image information left. I normally combat this using the exposure slider. Then we see that here in the shadows there's quite a lot of clipping too, and instead of raising this with the shadow slider, I normally use the blacks for this. And raising it around 25 will make these warnings disappear. One handy thing is if you click Alt while you're using the black or the white slider, you will get this warning in big size. So basically when I lower the blacks, I see that all this area is completely underexposed, and when I keep raising it, the moment where it disappears is the moment where we have all information back in our image. Same for the whites. If I click Alt and press the whites and then I raise it, I will see this area warned all of a sudden, and that means that this is completely overexposed, pure white, no detail left, something we of course don't want to do. So I raise this +2 and then I lower the highlights a little bit, the warning's gone, everything looks nice. Yes, and I want this image to go from shadow to light, and then also from cold to warm, which are two transitions that you can use to guide the viewer's eye. So I check what happens if I change the white balance to daylight. As shot. I definitely like what I see when I change it to daylight, but I want to have more of this cold to warm transition in it. But instead of playing too much with the white balance right now, I'll jump to the camera calibration tab, which is something extremely useful for many images, and I think many of you ain't using it, so pay attention now. When I address the blue primary channel, you see what happens? The image gets warmed up and overall it boosts the saturation of the image, but without any weird image effects that you can get when you use the saturation slider, because saturation makes everything look horrible, but the camera calibration works differently and you get a way better influencing of the colors. I go to 80 here, and then I can also change the hue of what I did just now. And I like what happens when I reduce the hue slightly, like to -10, add some magenta, let's say -15, I'm okay with that. Checking what happens when I use the red primaries, I just raise that to 5. And leave the hue alone. Okay, back here to the white balance, where almost every image deserves a customly done white balance. I raise this a tad more and leave this around here. But what we lost is the transition from blue or from cold to warm. There's a really neat way of adding this back, and for that I choose the Radial Filter. The Radial Filter is like a genius tool that you can use for many different things in your image. I always use it for vignetting. So let's make sure we have outside selected, and then you can see here how we can add a nice little vignette. Now you may ask yourself why I use a radial filter for that, and you're right, I can also use different things. I could go here to the effects panel, choose post crop vignetting, and it will add a nice vignette. It's actually not a bad vignette that it adds, but using the radial filter I can control everything in this image, and I have just way more options. So let's lower this a little bit for the view guiding to get the view of the people who watch this image go directly from dark to light. And then I wanted more of this transition in the colors. So I will go down here with the temperature slightly, like you can totally overdo it. This would be horrible. But around here, like -30, I like it because I get this transition not only from dark to light, but also from cold to warm, which is something that I definitely want. Okay, so this is a change in the image that I really often use. But why should we stop here if we can just play around much more with the radial filter? It's just a genius tool. So we create a new radial filter, and instead of lowering the brightness, the exposure, we will raise it. We will leave the colors alone for now. And now comes the magic trick. If you brighten the image a little bit, but then you use a negative setting of the dehaze filter, like -7. -7 is something I often use. And then we choose inside. Then you can see we will exaggerate it. Then you can see how you can totally control the light in your scene. You see, and if you ask yourself why I use the clarity, or let's say the dehaze slider, it's simply because I can make it look like real light. So you can maybe say this is faking light. For me, it's just enhancing the light that I have in the scene. But if you go too wild, it will just be washed out. So I keep it always around -5, between -5 to -10. In this case, I just chose -7. Okay, so we can apply light to our scene. And actually in this image it very much makes sense to have light in this scene because the sun is blasting right into the scene, right? And just keep this not too heavy, +30, it's totally fine. And then I make this a little bit bigger. And what you can do now, which is one of the genius things about this trick, is you can also change the color of the look of the light. You can make it blue, which makes absolutely no sense, or you can warm it up, which makes sense with the scene that we have right here. Okay, so I added a little bit of light here, and I still think that the borders of the image are too dark. So I will bring back some of these borders with another radial filter with similar settings, but not as strong as the one before. And I add another one over here. Just to keep it more balanced. Right there, we changed the image quite massively and did that right on the RAW file. And I will take one last look at the colors. And then I just had the idea of dropping a gradient in the sky to close the image down a little bit more, just to get the frame nicely closed. And I remove all this stuff. I just want to darken it. Not too much. Okay. Right there. And I will be cropping this one in later on. I want to remove all this stuff over here. Like a 16:9 crop, because I don't really need much of the foreground information going on in this image. I just want it nice and moody with the focus directly on the light. But these are things I actually really do in Photoshop later on. Now it's time to check the texture slider that I always use between like 5 and 15. Then also add some clarity, where I never go wild in the clarity. I just leave it around 10 to 15 maximum. So here we see the change that I did. And for this editing, I really, until like 1 or 1.5 years ago, I thought that to reach such a change in the image, I would have to use Photoshop. But it's not true anymore. You can actually use Camera RAW or Lightroom to edit pictures where other people would think that you did heavy intercourse in Photoshop. You can use the RAW converter and do it just on the RAW file. Let's have a look at another image, also taken on the Faroe Islands, where the sun was coming in between of the clouds, and then it was like painting different parts of the mountain range, and I was just standing there with the telephoto in my hands trying to catch some of this drifting light. Again, I'll check the landscape profile, and then in this image I want to really focus all the attention on the light, going from dark to bright, which makes total sense with that kind of light. So I'm lowering the exposure. There's no clipping whatsoever in this image, so I will go a little bit more like this. Then raise the white slightly. You see how the image changes. I go like plus 15 or something. Have a look at the blacks. I can't darken it too much, but I want it to really pop and be very contrasty. Quickly raise the detail and lower the radius, because all the sharpening that I apply will be done later on in Photoshop. Chromatic aberrations, lens corrections, and then directly into the blue primary, which again does quite a good job. Check the green, because here we have greens in the scene. Leave it at 1. Check the red primary. I don't like what it changes, so I don't use it for this one. And then back here, textures, clarity. And now in just few seconds I got the image where I want to have it before using the Radial filter. Let's start with the vignetting again as first step. Lowering the exposure in the borders of the frame to guide the eye. And then comes this trick again with the adding light to your picture, with a radial filter that works on the inside. Important to check this. So let's have a look, exaggerating it again. See, this is basically what the sun had been doing in that moment anyways, but I want to improve how it looks on the mountains with plus 30. Going like this, warming it up a little bit, like plus 7. Raising the dehaze, lowering the dehaze again to like minus 6 in this case. And I think it improved already once again. Before, after, before, and after. This is an image that doesn't require much, but it's again just to show you how powerful these tools really are if you know how to use them. That's it for the first part of this video. I hope you picked up a trick that you enjoyed, that you liked, and maybe even that you didn't hear about before. If you enjoyed this, it's super important to do all the good stuff that everybody on YouTube asks you to do. I'd appreciate you subscribing to this channel. I'd love you giving a thumbs up to the video. I love a heart and whatever, and I'm getting all drop me a DM on Instagram and stay tuned for the next video. That's all. Peace.